Attendees trickling in. I'm going to wait a minute or two so that we have everybody on board. Going to give it another minute or so before I start running into our webinar for today. A bunch of attendees coming in now. Some very familiar names. I want to thank you all for joining us as well. Okay, and we are recording, so I will all right, I'll get started. I figure as people join us, they can catch up as we're getting on. I do want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Loren Keim. I'm a professor of practice in the Goodman Center for Real Estate and the program manager. I've been teaching courses there since 2004, 2005. I'm also in the industry, so I have a little bit of knowledge there. I've got several real estate offices that handle both residential and commercial investment properties, and about 110 brokers and agents on my team. And today we're going to talk about the new normal in commercial real estate, commercial investment real estate, and perhaps creating some value in renovating, redeveloping, and repositioning property, uncovering that hidden potential. For those of you who have not participated in Lehigh University's real estate program, we educate anyone with an interest in real estate with a combination of classroom learning, real-world case studies, and physically going out and viewing projects and interacting with principals, brokers, developers, and those in the field. This is a group of students with Professor Price and I on top of a roof on Park Avenue in Manhattan. We've got some great events with some great speakers and incredible panels. In the center of this picture, we've got Mark Holliday, the CEO of SL Green, and just great events that we do. This past year, we've had the opportunity to do a great hard hat tour for a pair of buildings, U City Square being erected in Philadelphia by Ventas, and spent some time with the Executive VP and Chief Investment Officer, John Cobb. That's him on the left-hand side of your screen. That's us up on probably the 12th floor of that building, taking a look at it. We were also able to do our final Real Estate Practicum competition in person this year for the first time in a few years in Manhattan on the 27th floor of 45 Rockefeller Plaza with incredible help of Art Lowenfish. These are some of our students in some of the breakout rooms and meeting rooms getting ready for their speeches. These are some of our illustrious judges, and this was the winning team from this year's practicum. So I think we've got a great program and always trying to put on something that will hopefully benefit you one way or another. And I do hope that you're going to get something today out of this. From the roster that I'm seeing of the attendee list here, I'm noticing some of you are far more experienced in repositioning property than I am, and you are in a variety of markets. I know that many of you have very strong opinions on where the office and retail markets are going. Some of you think it's returning gangbusters, and some of you are expecting a second wave of decline. Maybe in a few weeks, we'll put together a panel. Shannon's probably going to shoot me for saying this, but maybe we'll put together a panel to discuss varying options. But for today, I'm going to introduce some thoughts on what's happening in commercial investment real estate and how someone might pivot to take advantage of what's happening in the industry. So the talk today is, are we in a new commercial real estate era? And part of that really depends on your location, as we all know that real estate is local. And part of it depends on your specialization. In most parts of the country, and when I'm in front of a live audience, I usually try and ask the question, but in most parts of the country, warehousing and distribution is very, very hot right now. That's particularly true on the East Coast. Self-storage is a hot market. Multifamily in most areas is still red hot as rental rates continue to rise in double-digit formats in many areas. But there are some cooling areas around the country as well, mostly in the large urban locations and in northern US locations. Office is suffering in much of the country, particularly in the suburban markets. Many retail products have been damaged by quarantines, which accelerated the decline of what was already occurring. And as we enter this post-COVID era for commercial real estate, there are many factors commercial property owners face. Office building vacancies have risen with employees working remotely from home. And I know some of you disagree with me on that. You believe they are coming back. And retailers and brick and mortar stores have seen a downturn, and some of them have been going out of business. So where does that leave the building owners? So today I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about how to create new value in tired properties with renovation, repositioning, releasing, or redeveloping. And I'm going to use a lot of examples and some case studies, some very big ones and some very small ones that are hopefully going to help you to think outside the box of what might be possible with some of the buildings that you may be working with or managing. I do want to start in the beginning by looking at what's happening in the market and why we're even discussing repositioning at all. Now, I've been looking at articles over the past few months, as I'm sure all of you have, looking at CoStar, looking at anything that is sharing commercial real estate articles. And we can find articles and data over the past 90 days that say the market is crashing badly for office. And there are articles saying the market is roaring back. This particular article, which with the source of Cushman & Wakefield, goes over the jump in vacancy rate for office space in San Francisco over the past 3 years. And you can see that it almost quadrupled over the last 3 years in office space in San Francisco. This, I believe, is from CoStar. It showed an increase of 7.5% of vacancy in San Francisco. Now that's 7.5% on top of the current vacancy. That's adding 7.5% to the total. Seattle's at almost 4% additional vacancy, New York at 3.5%, Boston at 2.7%, and even Miami, which has been a relatively hot market, has an additional 2% vacancy. From Esri, an article from a few weeks ago speaks to the adaptive reuse driving new office rentals because of falling occupancy. And this is from Knowledge at Wharton, a real estate professor at Wharton, Joseph, and I butcher his name all the time, Gyarko. And you know they're almost as good as Lehigh down there at Wharton, by the way, said it's too early to predict exactly how much demand for office space will decline because commercial leases generally last 5 to 7 years. He said it's clear that when those leases expire, the market will not be the same. He's one of many voices stating that there's going to be a flight to quality, meaning that office users are going to rethink their space needs as those leases roll over, and they'll transition into newer space or more modern buildings, meaning those Class A minus or those Class B properties might suffer in the long term as everyone moves into the newest building in town. For good or bad, companies have been calling workers back to the office, but many of them prefer to work at least partially remotely or work in a hybrid model, which means a reduction in the space required for many of these companies. And when there aren't as many workers in that building, that Starbucks downstairs on the first floor isn't going to do as well also. The restaurant and even the convenience store around the corner may suffer as well. Gyarko predicts a downward spiral in the weaker or secondary office markets like the Lehigh Valley that don't have as much natural growth to them in that office product. Now, for example, this is the former Guardian Life Insurance building in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, not far from Lehigh, which was a beautiful, nearly 200,000 square foot office building and campus. J.D. Petrucci tore this building down recently to make room for 3 flex buildings or distribution buildings. Who would have thought that we'd be tearing down these types of buildings to put up warehousing? That it'd be more profitable to lease a warehouse than it would to lease an office building in this environment. But we're seeing a lot of this. Another article on Yahoo Finance states that remote work is likely to be a permanent feature. The technology service Castle, which tracks key card entry into office buildings in 10 major metropolitan areas, say they are showing that just 42.8% of workers this past month are going back into their office on average, and that's across 10 metropolitan areas. The highest is Austin, with 62% of the workers returning and going in. While in New York, they're saying it's standing at 37.1%. So just barely over a third of the people who had been going to work 2 years ago are still showing up in those office buildings. Now that's from Castle. That's a group that studies this and tracks key card entries. There are indicators that office rents in Manhattan are improving, as Colliers reported a 3.1% increase, but many of the new leases are in new premium buildings, and vacancy rates are remaining near record high levels. Cheddar News broadcast, an interview with Ryan Servino, who many of you might know, the chief economist for JLL. Ryan acknowledged that many office workers in major cities still had concerns as of late March and early April coming back into offices, but stated that it may be cushioned by alterations in buildings to make employees feel that their health is not at risk as much. He also pointed out that while some older office buildings are being converted into residential apartments, because newer buildings have more amenities, have better environmental footprints, and are unlikely to become mixed use. So buildings that were constructed in 2015 and after had vacancy rates that were declining even in the beginning of 2021. It's the older buildings that seem to be struggling a little bit more. Now, as a counterpoint, there are articles touting the return of office space demand. The CNBC report stated that office tenant tours were up 20% and that the office vacancy rate was down slightly to 18.1% from 18.38% a year ago. 18.28% a year ago, sorry, 18 basis point drop. So there is some positive news on the horizon as well. And again, I don't know that any of us yet know what's going to happen in the long run. None of us have a crystal ball. Although some of us have very strong opinions, and I've heard many of them recently. Many of the leases we see for space in New York City and Washington, D.C. and Boston are 10+ year leases. And these are AAA rated companies that rent premium space, and they're unlikely to just walk away from that space. But as leases expire, they may change their footprints based on their needs. In secondary markets, many leases are 1 to 5 years and are filled with companies that may not be Google and Facebook. And we're seeing vacancy in those markets as smaller firms retrench. Most workers seem to want a place to come, even if it's infrequent, and making that office space work for employees is going to be critical to acquiring the best talent for your firm. So you've got to poll your workers to see what's important to them and make those changes as you're going forward. But again, coming back to what we're talking about today, trying to reposition those assets, I always talk about thinking not just outside the box, think like there's no box at all. We have to rethink everything we do. So for some of you, we're going to talk a little bit about suburban markets, a little bit about urban markets, but what really is adding value, at least to me, it's creating a higher return, realizing that return right now, or it's creating a higher property value in the long term and realizing that return when you ultimately sell the property. There are lots of ways to do it. We can reposition that property. We can do that with remodeling, refreshing the space, opening it up. We can add revenue to the property, and there's lots of ways we'll talk about to do that. We can change the use of the property. And then in retail, which I'm going to finish up with today, we're talking about bringing traffic back to retail or maybe changing the use of those retail sites. So repositioning, the simple solution is really remodeling. And I always like to go back to houses because you can transfer most of what you see in houses to something else. So if you look at a house, you want to flip a property, you want to turn something around and make it new and be able to get a higher price for it, like many people do on HGTV. We've gone through transitions over time. Obviously, back in the 40s and 50s, kitchens looked more like that or like this. And then eventually we got into the 60s, and for some reason, this was attractive to people. We got into the early 70s, and I have no idea what they were thinking. And then this became popular for a long period of time. At some point, somebody in the late 70s thought it was a good idea to put roof shingles on the inside in your kitchen. This became a popular style for a long time, raised panel oak cabinets with Corian countertop. It's a similar look. And then we got into the more modern looks. But a kitchen like this, it might have cost you $40,000 15 years ago, is outdated today. We see young people going through properties and saying, oh God, they're actual wood cabinets. I want something different. Because young people want gray or they want white. And their kitchens look more like this. This is a typical look with the gray and the white cabinets. That's what's hot right now. This is a very expensive kitchen. But how long is it going to be before those go away as well? So if we're looking at office buildings, how do we apply that to try and attract those tenants or find a way to reuse them? Now, the standby that we've used in class for several years has been SL Green's renovation of 3 Columbus Circle. For those of you who don't know this property, the brick facade was replaced with a glass curtain wall. This is an SL Green project. New lobby was backlit with frosted glass walls, brushed bronze wall accents, white marble floors, new high-speed elevators. They took effectively a Class B property and made it something closer to a Class A. And this $80 million renovation attracted trophy tenants into the building. And as a whole, Moody's rated 70% of those tenants as investment grade. So now, more than ever, the quality of the tenants is paramount to longevity in these buildings. Not only are we getting a higher rental rate for that $80 million investment, but we're also getting a lower cap rate when we turn around and sell the building. That's what the back looks like. Another one, New York, as an example, taking a building at 1 Madison and adding on an additional tower, building some exterior space for that building, opening up the windows along at least one of these towers to attract those high-paying tenants. And one of my favorite projects, which we were able to view in person 2 years ago, was one of L&L Management's buildings, 425 Park Avenue. This was taking a building that looked like this, right down the street from Park Avenue, and converting that building into something that looks more like this. Now, this is a very expensive rebuild of this building. But again, trying to attract those high-paying tenants and keep it the way it is. On the left, you can see this dead space above the on the top of the roof as the building steps back. They're able to create an incredible mezzanine area in there. And you can see how they converted everything to glass, giving it that feel of openness, that new building look in a building that was already existing. This is the mezzanine area on the inside as an example. Now, this is a very big project. We'll look at some small ones as well. And typical office space, whether you're looking at New York or you're looking at any major city, you've often got the windows that are just this height. You've got a small area along the outside. This area is going to have the utilities running through it. Some of them will run through the ceiling. You typically have the heat along the outside. So how do we take this and turn it into something that is more attractive? Here's another look at a typical older building, Class B. You can see the heating units down here at the bottom. What Lapidus and L&L were able to do is open that up and turn it into full glass walls. And that's going to attract those tenants that you want paying the most money. And this building is perfect for it because it overlooks Central Park. There's another look going through the building, how nice and open it is. Let's now look at the mezzanine. And of course, there is some outside space as well to this, which is very popular in Manhattan buildings. By the way, this is the developer, Robert Lapidus, in the middle. I'm on the left, and then on the right-hand side, we've got some students that we had with us. So what is it that attracts companies? What is it that companies want New York in the Park Avenue district, and why would they pay so much more to rent one with full glass walls than what existed currently? You're already in the same spot. Those companies want to attract the best talent. And in order to attract that best talent, you have to impress them. They also want to have convenient and upscale space to attract employees and clients. They want to have open space that they can redefine without being limited by columns. And what workers want is open spaces and fresh air or air exchange. So that's what gets put into a building like this. And I don't have the correct numbers for this, but rent ranges were much, much higher after this renovation project, after this construction. There's a building that's a little bit smaller scale in Denver, Colorado, and I'll go through a couple of iterations of this. But the Vault, which was a financial building in Denver, Colorado, was repositioned to offer flexible floor plates to attract tech companies and creative companies, in addition to those typical law firms and financial firms that would normally occupy this type of space. The ground floor was redesigned into a grand lobby, which I'll show you, with innovative food and beverage retailers. That attracted many of the tenants in there, and the ability to change their space upstairs helped as well. And again, they rented it for much higher rates. This was a great building in Los Angeles. Very, very ugly post office, one of the worst I had seen. 400,000 square feet though, built 1971. It was purchased by a developer for $46.5 million. They put $30 million into transforming that property into a creative office campus. And they polled what the potential employees and potential tenants wanted in order to rent space in that area. Great location, ugly building. So what was important to them? And oddly enough, what was important to them was a sand volleyball court, a dog park, a car wash, and a fitness center, all put onto this property as ways to attract those high-paying tenants. And the new tenants in the building included TMZ, Microsoft, Sony, and Verizon. So the investor paid 46.5 million, put 30 into it, 76.5 total, and flipped the property in under 4 years for $316 million. They had credit-worthy tenants. They were able to sell it at a lower cap rate and a much higher return. So how do we enhance that value? Let's bring it down to something very small. This is a building I used to own in Whitehall, Pennsylvania. And in the front was a 2-unit. So we've got a 2-unit building that's rented and making decent return. But there is an alley behind and there's open space. Now we're always looking for where we're going to try and add value. We'll talk about it on every type of property that we have. So in this case, what could be done is adding a garage. And I want to start with the smallest thing and kind of build up to why these things work. So if we add a 2-car garage, we're significantly changing the value of that property. In this 2-unit, we might have each unit rented for $1,000 a month. Actually, today they're probably more like $1,500 a month. So we've got $24,000 a year coming in yearly. We've got fixed expenses. So we've got a net income of $13.8 and a value at an 8% cap rate of $172.5. Now I know in Jersey City that cap rate is going to be 5.5, but $172.5 value for this 2-unit property. If we put on a 2-car garage, and by the way, 2-car garages are only running about $22,000 to build in this region. So if we put that on and we rent it for only $300 a month, now we could probably rent each bay for a lot more than $150, but just conservatively saying $150. That adds $3,600 directly to the bottom line, which gives us a value of $217. So we're actually adding about $45,000 in value for a $22,000 investment. If we're able to rent those for $500, $250 a piece, we're actually increasing the value by about $75,000 for a $22,000 investment. So you're always looking for ways to capitalize to add that value. And sometimes we can add a lot more than just a 2-car garage. There are lots of additional revenue streams we can put into storage these days, which again is very hot. We've seen a lot of buildings lately looking for billboards, putting billboards on top of buildings, trying to add something that will attract attention and be able to rent. This is one in New York. This is actually put on the side of a building instead. Wherever we can add value is something that's going to significantly improve the value of the property. We've even had clients I'm seeing across the country that there are interior advertising firms in office buildings that are selling digital advertising inside and revenue sharing with the owner of the building. Another way to create a revenue stream. And in suburban markets, perhaps we'll add cell phone towers as additional revenue streams. They might pay $1,000 or $1,200 a month, which could be a significant increase. Or we might add, of course, vending machines in the building as well. Anything that can share revenue into the building. We've even seen in some of the retail centers that are having trouble surviving, adding parking for RVs or parking for trucking on parts of their parking lots to try and generate some of that additional revenue if they can, try and bring that into their use. And the other thing I'm going to mention is co-working space. I know WeWork's implosion was massive, but there is a lot of traction with co-working space. We've actually converted 5 buildings in our firm, I think, over the past 2 years to co-working and done quite well with them. And you can turn it into almost anything. These are some examples of co-working space, but it's space where independent workers, like freelancers and entrepreneurs, meet to work independently in an office environment. It doesn't have to be set up like the WeWork space. It doesn't have to have a bar. It doesn't have to have all the vending machines, but you can have that. You can also have a collaborative space. You can have space for educational events that can be leased. You can lease individual private offices, shared desks, or dedicated memberships. And membership fees can be daily, monthly, quarterly, or annually. Here's another example of some co-working space, more co-working space where they're actually renting all of these spaces, and they're doing it based on a subscription model where people pay to be there and use the space at will. And they have so many hours a week or a month they're able to use. Same thing with this. And co-working can be quite profitable. If you're in the Lehigh Valley market, as an example, obviously these numbers are going to look very low to you in Northern Jersey and New York. But if I've got a 10,000 square foot office space, I'm likely going to rent that in the Lehigh Valley somewhere between $12 and $18 a square foot. So that's 180,000 a year. I might get CAM fees, another maybe $3. So I've got 210,000 in gross income. I've got some expenses, and my net income comes at 180,000. If I'm able to instead put 5 desks in, I can't remember exactly how I calculated this, but if I'm able to put in co-working space at 80 square feet per person, which is actually a little bit more than the typical office, or about 125 desks in that space. And I can probably have 8 subscriptions for every 5 spots, every 5 desks in there at about $300 a month. I can grow that income to about 460,000 instead of 180. Now there's going to be some additional expense, some additional management that goes into that. But you might still be able to, if you can get this full, be somewhere in the $350,000 to $400,000 range in income as opposed to 180. But it's a lot more labor intense to put something like this together. And again, there are a lot of ways to create this. There are private offices you can lease. There's dedicated desks or shared desks at a lower rate, flexible desks, conference room rentals, social spaces rented at discount fees for members. A lot of them are doing private audio and video call cabins, lockers that you can rent separately for storage in the office, mailboxes you can rent, computer and printer rentals, membership tiers can be done, desk for a day, a 10-day bundle. There's lots of ways to do it. One of the ones we're working on currently is kind of interesting. It's a wellness co-working space where the entire building has been converted to wellness offices, and it's been built out to have therapists, chiropractors, massage, yoga studio, and a salt room. I had never heard of a salt room before. Maybe some of you have. Apparently you go into this room and you can sit on something or lay on something, and the salt apparently pulls all the bad stuff out of you. Again, never heard anything about this at all, but it's very popular and apparently booked fairly solid. So I'm thinking in all the buildings I own now, I'm going to quickly put in a salt room with pink Himalayan salt and see what happens. But again, lots of ways to try and create and generate income from that building that's sitting empty. Some of the challenges of co-working spaces is management intense. You've got a potential 15% monthly turnover. And you may be providing bathroom supplies, cleaning, coffee, tea, and snacks. You also have to have some sort of access control. So there are some challenges to it. But there are also opportunities to reuse that space and maybe even get a higher return on it if you do it the right way. So again, we're trying to either create a higher return or we're trying to create a higher property value. And the cap rates in your markets can be all across the board. Multifamily properties in some areas are only 5%. In coal regions areas, we're seeing some that are 12 and 14% and still getting that kind of cap rate. For warehouses and distribution, hottest property type in the marketplace are very low cap rates at the moment. Triple net pharmacies tend to be a low cap rate. But what about 1980s office space and downtown office space and retail strip malls? That's a little bit more challenging. And property value, as we all know, is a function of property type, location, condition, and the strength of the tenants. If we can alter that use, can we improve both the rental income and the value based on the cap rate? And again, for some of you on this Zoom meeting today, this might be a little basic, but I want to take it into the retail sector in a few minutes. So if we have a property on a nice corner and we have a triple net lease to Joe's Pizza, as much as I love Joe's Pizza, it's nice, it's greasy, it's big, it's delicious, it carries a different cap rate than if we're going to triple net lease that same spot to CVS or Rite Aid or one of the pharmacies. It's just the reality. So if we can convert that over to CVS and we can lease it at hopefully a higher rate, we're going to be selling it at a lower cap rate and making a better return. This is a building on MacArthur Road from 2 years ago that is not far from Lehigh University. 1970 strip mall that was anchored by Radio Shack. It had a My Place restaurant and Island, so all national franchise type tenants, not doing very well at that corner. And it was changed over to a medical net lease to St. Luke's Hospital. And they actually took the same footprint. If you can see this, it's the same actual walls. They just changed what they did on the outside, created a new facade, utilized the entire interior. They're getting a higher rental rate than they were before, and obviously it's going to trade at a lower cap rate when that building eventually sells. When there's disruption, there's always opportunity. There's a lot of pain, but there's also opportunity as well. So where do we find that opportunity? What is it that consumers want and need? What voids exist in the community? Who are the potential tenants that we might be able to put in those spaces that we're trying to reconvert? And often, what's the highest and best use of that site? Will zoning allow that change? Is the project financially feasible and legally possible? And you've got to be wary all the time of those people who are trying to stop you from developing anywhere you want to develop. And again, are there any leases or easements across the property that may affect your ability to reposition or redevelop that space? So we're always looking first at the zoning and what the potential uses are, trying to figure out what we can put in that space, whether it's a skyscraper in Manhattan and we want to convert it over to space for a hotel, or whether it's a corner site in the Lehigh Valley and we want to convert it to a CVS. What can we do with it? What are the setbacks? What are the maximum height restrictions? How much parking do we need? And what's the maximum coverage we can cover? What are we looking at to try and make something work to get the best on it we can? So some of our students actually work on highest and best use projects when we compete in competitions in Villanova and Monmouth. Try and figure out if we take a site that has had something else on it and we change that to something else, what's that highest use we can create? What's the highest return? So this is an example of a 100,000 square foot shopping center. Zoning requires 5 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet or 150,000 square feet of parking. But residential in the same area requires only 1 spot per unit. So if we redevelop this same site into 300,000 square feet of residential with 1 spot per unit, we can cover more of that land. We can build 2 or 3 stories and we can create more income on the same site. It's always trying to figure out what the best use is. And the one I use far too often, my favorite fight that happened in around Lehigh, was the Durkee Spice Plant. And I promise I'll get to retail in a minute. Durkee Spice Plant was zoned heavy industrial. There is a train track running by it, but there's also an intersection of 2 major roads, including the divided highway Route 378. And Lowe's came in and bought it, figuring they could plop down a Lowe's on it, degrade the zoning from, or downgrade the zoning from industrial down to commercial, and be able to put a Lowe's there. And they got turned down because too many people at the city felt that if you just wait long enough, somebody's going to come along and give high-paying union job wages for another manufacturing plant. And unfortunately, in this day and age, it doesn't happen very often. So J.G. Petrucci came in, bought out the property, and had a plan A and a plan B. And they went into the city. And by the way, here's a picture of major road here. That's 8th Avenue. And then you've got a divided highway here. It's at an intersection. So retail is probably the best use for that property. This is where Martin Towers used to be for Bethlehem Steel that has now been imploded. And Petrucci went into them and said, listen, I'd like to put a Lowe's here. This is what makes sense. And he actually talked to all the neighbors ahead of time, got them to come along and wear bright yellow shirts and said, say yes to Lowe's. And the city again turned it down. He said, that's not a problem. Here's plan B. Plan B is I turn it into, let's say, a junkyard or something else, which I have full permission to do because it's by right. And you're not going to have any jobs created. And I can do that without an approval. And the city did end up approving that Lowe's. And since that time, they were able to build a Aldi in the front, a Lowe's, then in the back has been some high-end apartments. So trying to reuse that site, which was a great site. We tend to teach students how to use ArcGIS and Business Analyst to find opportunities, to try and map out. I hope most of you are using this now, but to try and use some sort of GIS system to try and figure out where opportunities are. And if you've got a site that you're trying to redevelop, what is missing from that area that consumers are demanding that might actually work to put in that place. So for example, I might be able to take a parcel and figure out how to plot all the properties in the area that are around it. Or I might want to do a report of what the retail demand looks like in that area and what the services that exist are. I can pull that report and see where there are gaps, where there's a gap in the demand and supply. There might be more people looking for beer and wine, and there may be no supply in this particular location. So there's a potential for something to go there. So we're looking at how we're going to put something there that's going to serve the community that someone's going to take. We can also look on the map at traffic counts. We can pull up business and facility searches. So if I'm trying to place in this case, a liquor business in that location, I can actually have the software plot all the other liquor stores in the area, what their drive time is to that location. I can compare those locations and where people are likely to travel to. I can even select several sites and try and figure out what works best for everybody in the area and where they're most likely to go. And I can plot different locations and figure out if I had 4 possible locations to use, what's the population in each area in a 5-minute drive time or a 10-minute walk time or a 10-minute drive time? What's the median household income? How much are they spending on the type of product we're looking to sell? So there's a lot of great software out there now that allow us to really look at properties and figure out what the best use are. We can map sites that are competitive. We can look at the suitability of the site using GIS mapping. And we can look at all the different possibilities in an area and try and build something that's going to work for us. Let me skip past this for a second. We can also pull up a tapestry segmentation. For those of you who have not used GIS mapping, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but there are some great tools that are available now that tell you a lot about the population around any building you have or any building you're trying to develop. Who is living there? What are their likes and dislikes? Because all this stuff is put in from the Census Bureau and many other organizations, all flows into this central GIS mapping that allows us to overlay one thing over another and try and figure out what's the best spot for a particular type of business and where there's that gap. We're doing a gap analysis to figure out what works. Again, where there's disruption, there's opportunity. So getting back finally to retail, there's so much pain in the retail market right now. December of 2021, I must have done 10 interviews with different news outlets about whether or not, or I guess November, it was right before Thanksgiving. So many outlets wanted to know, are consumers coming back to shopping centers, to indoor malls? Are they going to start coming back and shopping? And I don't have any idea how they thought I was an expert on that, but I'm always willing to talk about almost anything. So we're looking at a lot of changes happening in the retail market. Some of it has been exacerbated by, of course, the quarantines. And some of it was already in play because we had so many people that were buying online. Because frankly, it's much easier for me to go to Amazon, as much as I hate to say it, and look for that perfect Harry Potter memorabilia item for one of my kids, or that Batman toy, or that vase, or whatever, rather than going from store to store to store. And the segment of the industry that's been hurt the most, other than little small businesses, has been the department store. Walmart and Target have done a lot of damage in their fields. Amazon has kind of finished off a lot of the department stores. You're seeing them close all over the place. And so what do you do with a department store when it closes, when you've got 60, 80, or 120,000 square feet of space that is not easy to convert into small stores? The other problem that happens is once you lose those big major department stores, the inline retailers suffer as well. So in this case, this is a company that's been buying some of these wonderful department stores, which are already located in high traffic locations, have high visibilities. They often have strong demographics. And these buildings typically have high ceilings and open floor plans. They're converting them into interior self-storage, which is a hot market right now, taking some of these department stores and creating self-storage out of them. This is Janus. This is a building in Allentown. As an example, part of what's changing as well is trying to take out a lot of these old buildings and replace them with something that makes more sense. Because there is not a lot of foot traffic in downtown areas, whether you're talking about Philadelphia or Pottsville or any place in central Jersey. There's not a lot of foot traffic downtown. So how do you bring people back? You've got to create that. So as an example, this is one of the buildings that is being proposed where the first floor becomes retail again. Second floor becomes some office, but then you have 5 levels of apartments above. And if that happens across a whole area, you create that foot traffic with people working in that area and hopefully getting some sort of discount in their taxes based on things bringing them back. I can't think of the word. Opportunity zones bringing them back. And you've got people living in that area as well, trying to create that foot traffic to get people through. This is an example down the street from that on Hamilton as well, 2 smaller buildings. And where you might sell a building like this historically based on a cap rate, the reality is the value might be more in the land. Now, if you can see the building next to this, these 2 buildings are for sale at the moment. On the left-hand side, you're seeing what was 3 buildings that were torn down about the same size. And they were replaced with this gigantic building that has retail on the first floor, some office on the second, and then has a total of 78 apartments in it. Again, creating that foot traffic downtown, having a much higher value, much higher use for that site than 2 small buildings with some parking behind, able to create a higher income. And how are you attracting people to these downtown areas? Well, you create some value in those units. So in this case, we've got them being pet friendly, has a little library in it, bike and personal storage, a pet run and pet spa. There's a first floor lounge and coffee bar, a game lounge. They've got 24/7 monitored surveillance and control access. There's a little fitness center with yoga, free weight room, a rock climbing wall. Lots of stuff built into this to attract tenants. And by the way, these apartments in a downtown area in Allentown are actually getting higher rental rates than renting a whole twin house or duplex house in the West End. So very high rental rates for these new apartments that have some amenities that are more in line with what young people are looking for. And of course, those of you who went to Lehigh, you've probably all seen the Johnson Machine Shop, which was converted into condos, an old adaptive reuse that was done a decade ago, but an interesting building, 200,000 square feet. They manufactured artillery barrels in World War II, and then was vacated in the 1980s and was just marginally used for storage. That was converted as a historic rehabilitation into 171 luxury condos and 50,000 square feet of commercial space and a 462 space parking garage. But even something like this, to actually make it work, they had to get tax credits. They had to get a municipal bond floated that actually paid for the parking garage. And inside, they were able to put in 2 large courtyards, a very memorable feature of the space. See if I have a different view. And the condos were off this more industrial looking courtyard, tried to attract a different kind of clientele. This is what the inside of one of the condos looks like. They were between 750 and 2,700 square feet, granite countertops, a lot of historic touches to try and bring back those industrial days. They had a restaurant on the first floor and a gym. The restaurant is now closed, and that's being replaced by a public market, which is going to be open shortly and will look like this. Again, adaptive reuse in a downtown area. And in order to make this work, they had to get $25 million in bonds floated and a $1 million bond from Northampton County and $1.5 million inflection of money from Bethlehem Parking Authority to try and make this entire project work. But there's lots of things you can do to try and create something. So again, retail repurposing. So in the fourth quarter of 2020, 28% of all the distressed property in the United States, or 1.7 billion, was retail. And there are unfortunately zombie malls all over the country. There was an article recently in the Wall Street Journal that claimed that 75% of indoor malls would be gone in the next decade. And maybe they're right. It's always hard to tell what's going to be happening next. So if you have malls in your portfolio, you've got to be careful. And retail is failing. It's something that's been happening for a while. Downtowns at one point in time, lots of mayors across the country tried to support their downtowns, but downtowns became the victims of shopping malls because parking was easier at a shopping mall, it was convenient, it was closer to highways, and you could avoid the weather. And malls became victims to lifestyle centers. Somebody wanted to pull up quickly to a store, get in and out, and they wanted something more modern. And bricks and mortar retail has become a victim of online shopping. Anchor stores and destination uses. Anchor stores are the destination uses of those shopping centers, those malls. And inline and often impulse uses fit between them. Now, don't misunderstand me. Walmart and Target still do huge amounts of business, and people still like to go out and shop. But a larger and larger share of it is transitioning over to those online outlets. Even the name change from mall to Galleria or Promenade has become very popular. Recent study from CBRE showed that shopping centers have declined as a proportion of retail assets traded annually, falling from more than 40% a decade ago to about 25% in 2020. And the percentage of supermarkets being traded has risen and continues to grow in a post-COVID environment. So if I'm going to buy a shopping center, I'd rather have it anchored by a pharmacy or anchored by a grocery store, because those are things you're less likely to buy online. So why are we going to come back to those shopping centers? And what are we going to do with the retail space that's still there? A lot of it's being converted to medical uses, but I'll show you some other destination ideas. And somebody's posting that in Switzerland, sustainability is a major issue. CO2 zero emissions and biodiversity are trending across all building sectors. That is true. New York City, we just did an event on New York City and how much is changing there, how they're going to have to change the sustainability of all the buildings that exist in Manhattan and really improve them. So anyway, here's a retail building that was a former Borders bookstore, 23,000 square feet. It's now become a healthcare center, 18 exam rooms, 8 intake rooms, and 4 consulting rooms. This one, I forget what it was, but it became an urgent care in the Poconos, as an example, converting over a retail business over to, again, healthcare. And this is a New York Times article that I found interesting. This is a mall that you're seeing Banana Republic on the left-hand side, but the extra space is being filled in some cases by medical. One medical is right here on the corner, taking one of the premier spots in a shopping center, in this case, in a mall. Out of hospital and into the mall, examining the retailization of healthcare, that's become a trend. Many of these hospital centers, the larger ones, are trying to get back into the community. They're trying to build these facilities within a lot of other shopping districts, which is actually making it better for some of these shopping centers to create, to fill up that space. And also it becomes a destination again. Remember, in order to actually get stores to function, you've got to have foot traffic. And foot traffic comes if there's a reason for somebody to come there. And if there isn't a department store, a healthcare center is still going to bring people in. Strip mall clinics, and there are designs for it. There's a whole architectural firm in New York that just deals with conversion of retail space into healthcare. But some retail assets are selling at land value. This is the Phillipsburg Mall. For those of you who might have driven back and forth through New Jersey, this is just on the other side of Pennsylvania, going into New Jersey. It's a fairly large mall, 100 stores, 4,000 car parking lot, and unfortunately failed. Now, these stores that were in it, Kohl's, Bon-Ton, Sears, and I forget what this one was, but all of them ended up closing. All of the department stores shuttered. And what does that do to everybody else who's in here? They can't make it. So this is only open since 1989. They converted it over. It's a great location at the crossroads of Route 22 and I-78. They converted it over into what's going to become a distribution center, which is a better use for this property at this point in time. And obviously, we know warehouses lease for less than retail space does, but if you have an empty retail building, what's the value in it? And they're able to actually fit more warehousing, bigger footprint of warehousing on that site than they were retail to make up the difference. So what brings shoppers back? What creates that foot traffic? Altering destination uses from anchor stores to medical or to fitness, which is kind of hard to do online, although I guess you could get on a Peloton bike and compete against other people. But the reality is fitness tends to be done someplace. Entertainment and membership uses are all ways to bring people back. So healthcare, fitness centers, physical therapy centers, entertainment and sports venues, food and beverage will always be live. Education and training centers we're seeing, schools built in some of these shopping centers and malls, childcare, and new retail brands and pop-up stores, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes. And then creating alternative reasons to be on the site is changing some of these sites to mixed-use sites, getting people living and working in the complex, multifamily and office. There was a big battle in Washington, D.C. a number of years ago at a shopping center that's name is escaping me, where the zoning was commercial. And they wanted to be able to put a hotel, some residential apartments, and some office buildings on the site. And that became a struggle to get that finally approved and get that mixed use in place. Because we realize now when we started zoning in the 70s and 80s, we completely separated residential from commercial so they wouldn't be against each other. So you wouldn't have that 7-Eleven in your neighborhood or that gas station in your neighborhood. At the same time, though, we weren't able to put residential in many of the zoning areas where there's commercial. And part of the challenge with that is we're trying to reintegrate to try and bring that foot traffic back. We can also bring in hotels and hospitality and fulfillment centers. One of the biggest malls in the United States is the King of Prussia Mall, 2.9 million square feet. And those of you who know Philadelphia realize there's 5 or 6 million square feet of additional retail all around this. That area is just enormous with retail. One of the largest stores there, Lord & Taylor, went under or closed that building. And that building is sitting empty. So you suddenly have a 120,000 square foot retail store in one of the biggest malls in the country, and you can't fill it. So what do you do? So they're repositioning it. Part of it will be office space, part of it will be co-working space. Again, try and create demand. If you've got 120,000 square feet of workers, they're going to go to lunch in the mall. They're going to shop before and after work in the mall. That creates more traffic coming in and out of that mall. Anybody see the movie Mallrats? This is the Granite Run Mall, also in the same area, the other side of Philadelphia, but in the same area. Well-known mall at the time, but unfortunately it did not do well. So Bruce Toll of the Toll Brothers bought this and demolished parts of it and was able to reconfigure it. So they created the Promenade at Granite Run. They turned the stores that were remaining outward facing, put in Five Guys, Chipotle, whatever's going to attract attention in person, Supercuts. Modell's is here as well. They also created 400 luxury apartments on the site, entertainment, a hotel, lots of foot traffic to create that draw for those businesses as well. It's integrating the site. Avenue of at the American Dream. If you have not seen this, I have not actually been there, so I'm going to show you pictures, and I haven't been there myself. But this is a shopping complex in northern Jersey, and the concept to get somebody into a giant shopping center was to try and create destinations, themes, packages, entertainment, something that's going to bring them in. And they have lots and lots of entertainment here. DreamWorks Water Park, Nickelodeon Universe Theme Park inside, Blacklight Mini Golf, Mirror Maze, Sea Life Aquarium, Legoland. There's even indoor skiing in this. Here's the water park inside in the shopping center in the mall. This is Nickelodeon inside the mall, and this is indoor skiing inside the mall. Again, all things to try and create that foot traffic. People are going there as an entertainment venue and then hopefully shopping as well. And of course, we're all seeing in retail, it's all converting back to outward facing shopping. It seems to be the preference in the world today. You're able to park around them. You're able to go directly to the store you want to go to instead of walking into the mall and walking down long hallways. Everything's been converted the opposite way outside. And then if you haven't seen pop-up stores, we're seeing them all over the place. They're interesting. It's a way to try and A, get some more revenue coming into retail centers, and B, test the market to see if a store will work in a particular location or to create some temporary foot traffic. So in many malls and shopping centers, you're seeing these pop-up stores show up. They've got specials that'll draw people back to the shopping center. They may stop in there, and they may stop in some of the stores at the shopping center as well. Some of the pop-up stores we're seeing, this is outside of a mall, an Adidas store that pops up for a month. And during that month, people stop by to see that, but they're also going to go into the shopping center in the mall. Here's one from Gucci. Now, Gucci may not be, the area may not be, let's say, have the demographics, the high enough income level on average to bring in people who are going to shop at Gucci every day. But if you put one in for 4 weeks, all those people who can may take advantage of that. And again, it brings more people to the mall. Lowly Shoe Bar, I'm not sure what that is. This was kind of an elaborate one that was put up in a mall. Louis Vuitton has these pop-up stores that have been going out and being put in malls. I have no idea what this one is, but I would not go in there. It makes my head hurts. And then even outside of office buildings, you'll see pop-up delis. These are happening in many areas. Temporary pop-up delis might be there for a month, attract some attention. Here's Singtel, which is a phone carrier or cell phone carrier. You've got GoPro, which has been plopping these up in different locations temporarily, getting some attraction. And this is Coca-Cola. So lots of different opportunities. Now, again, they told me to try and keep it to an hour today. I'm at like an hour and 5 minutes. We just scratched the surface on repurposing commercial real estate. So again, don't think outside the box. Try and think like there's no box at all. There's lots of opportunity out there. And whatever you're looking at as an asset, there might be a way to reposition it and try and develop some additional income revenue streams from it. Shannon, are we able to take any questions at all? And again, we'll try and set up in the next couple of weeks, if we can, a panel discussion on some of these things and what you're seeing in your marketplaces.
You have 15 minutes for questions.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? You can type them in the chat, or you can, I don't know if Shannon can make you live or not. Or I continue to talk, and that really bores the daylights out of so many people on so many levels. And again, I do want to thank all of you for coming today. And again, please remember Lehigh University, every time you're donating money to a good cause, we're a great cause. All right, I may have gone through some of those a little quicker than I should have, but I do want to thank you all for being here today. If you have any questions, you can always get to me at lkk4@lehigh.edu. lkk4@lehigh.edu is the best place to get me. And I'll be happy to answer any questions, or if you're interested in participating in a future event, reach out to Shannon or to me, and we'll be happy to discuss it and try and put you in. So we got one question. With the onslaught of the logistics centers, what's happening to the surrounding real estate? It's a good question. It depends on the location. Obviously, people don't like to live directly next to logistics centers. But if you're seeing some areas like Hazleton, Pennsylvania is an area where there are a lot of logistics centers that opened all at once because of an opportunity zone. And that created opportunity for a Sheetz to open. I think there's a Wendy's there and a McDonald's. So some retail uses as well. It also does create the opportunity for housing, because housing, although you don't want it right against the logistics center, it employs people. And so they need a place to live. So there's always opportunity as these logistics centers open. Hope that answers your question somewhat. Anybody else? All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all of you attending today, and I hope this was somewhat helpful.